Welcome back. I'm your host, Leslie Cottle, and you are listening to This Empowered Life podcast, the podcast delivering tools, knowledge, and wisdom to empower the soul. Today's episode is called How to Heal Ancestral Trauma. If you've ever felt like you were healing things that weren't from your lifetime, you will not want to miss this episode. Keep on listening. Hello and welcome to the podcast today. This is all about healing ancestral patterns, which also you might have heard of generational trauma. So first we have to understand where our patterns come from, where our beliefs come from, and what makes up those things inside of us. So part of navigating the world as an adult is learning how to take away the disempowering stories that we believed as small children. Psychology focuses on the childhood and root trauma because so much of our patterns and day-to-day problems come from how we interpreted life as a child. So children take things really literally, which means that they might develop false beliefs about the absence of a parent. They might misunderstand a parent's decision that was made out of love and think it was hate. And there's all these different things that we do as kids, and we start believing things or projecting things on our parents. And this is psychology, and like therapists and therapy is so good for this, and for coming up with how we heal this. But what's really not covered in psychology is ancestral trauma. So trauma is a word that gets misunderstood a lot because it has a lot of meanings and refers to a lot of different things. So I just want to be clear that when I'm talking about trauma today, I'm talking about the energetic memory that the body stores based on life events. And these life events could be from your life, and they could also be from your ancestors' life. So I'll explain this a little bit further before we go into how to heal these things. But the body, the muscles, the fascia, the tissue, the DNA, every time that an event happens in your life, this is stored in the body. And it creates a memory about this. It tells you whether it's safe, it tells you whether it's dangerous, and it tells you how you should react. So this is how we end up with our emotional and psychological structure based on event by event by event. And again, this information, this trauma is stored in the body from not just your life, but also your ancestors' life. So when you think about trauma and how trauma is stored in the body, we have to be really aware of where it's coming from, because it could be from your life, but it could not be from your life. And this means that your grandmother could have experienced something traumatizing, and if she didn't heal from this, that you might have some unwanted pattern or fear from this incident in your lifetime, even though it happened in her lifetime. It's kind of crazy. So I think psychology is amazing at helping people uncover things about their own life. But, what do we do whenever we realize that we have patterns and things in our life and it comes not from our life, right? How do we empower ourselves in this moment? And I love this question. I love healing in this type of way. And because so many of us don't really have insight to the things that are going on. Even when you think about typical psychology, so much of that information is stored in the unconscious mind. We're not conscious of why we're making the choices that we're making. So if you don't have insight to that, on why you're making the choices that you're making, we have to start thinking about different ways to heal. And so a lot of us don't even have insight into, what happened in the past with our parents, what happened in the past with our grandparents. There's plenty of people who are adopted and don't have access to records of their families. You might be a part of a family where a parent or both parents have passed away and you don't have that type of information. And even for the people who still have living biological parents, you probably still don't have records of specific events that happened in the family either. And I always think about like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, how many things were swept under the rug and were never talked about. If a woman ever got pregnant out of wedlock, sometimes people would just send the woman away. They would have the baby. Then the person would return back home and nobody would talk about it. Everyone would pretend that it didn't happen. And it would just be a secret forever. So there's a lot of family secrets that are out there that we don't know about. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge that. And you can go into your history and you can find it. You can talk to your parents and to your relatives. And sometimes people don't want to do that either. So it seems like this is just like a really big thing that I'm seeing everywhere right now, where people are getting called to heal their family lineage lines. They're getting called to heal themselves. And they've just, people are sick of it. They don't want to do things the way that maybe they were raised to do them or were taught to do them by whoever, right? People don't want to keep suffering. People don't want to be silent. People don't want to continue in the steps of people, of the examples that they have, not because those examples are bad, but because they can see that they can live their life in a lot more harmony and integrity if they just honored who they were and stepped into their self-worth. So I want you to think about this when you're acknowledging where you've come from and what you're stepping away from, what you're stepping into. And I want you to acknowledge how unsafe that could feel. Because it's definitely really hard to be the first person around you who's doing it. It's going to be hard to be the first person healing the way that you're choosing to heal or changing the way that you want to change. So I commend you and I acknowledge you for that. And I know sometimes we're just like, oh my gosh, if no one around me is doing this, how do I do it? How do I do this? And so we're going to talk about a few things when you're healing things that you just have no idea where they're coming from or what's going on. Because at some point you might recognize this in your life and recognize that things aren't from your lifetime, whether it's just an intuitive hit or you're just super aware that things don't belong to you. So first, I want you to be aware that this is so real. And second, we're going to start talking about these things, these ways to start working with emotions and thoughts that are really going to help you. So the first thing I want to talk about is recognizing patterns. Just like in normal psychology, patterns are what keeps you stuck in that loop where you're not changing. And a big part of change and healing is becoming really aware of what's happening. So what thoughts you have, what images you have in your head, what things that you're feeling in your body, what stories that you're telling yourself, what happened to trigger those emotions or actions that you're playing out. And so to do this is the easiest way that I know how to do this is to keep a really detailed journal. You can write anything down that comes up through any point at the day, and you don't even have to look at this until a week later, a day later, and you can keep this log for yourself so you can start seeing the patterns and what's triggering them. And it's really important to get these things so out of the mind so you can actually see them in physical form. Because we can tell ourselves all day long that oh, I had that thought, I had that thought, I had that thought. But until you write it down, you don't realize that you had that thought, 20 times a day, 100 times a day. Your brain has 50 to 70,000 thoughts per day. So this journal should be full of things. And it's really important to write them down so you can actually see what's happening before the thought, what's happening after the thought, what's happening. And so this is a really important way to dive into how to start building your awareness around these patterns. Second, I am going to suggest free writing. So free writing is when you just get a journal, a piece of paper, and write anything that you want with no agenda at all, everything that comes up. So this is especially helpful when you have a weird feeling, a triggering event, If you're really sad about something or can't really figure it out, you have to sit down with yourself and again, write it out. So you grab a journal, you write it out, you see what comes up. And usually what happens when you free write is at some point it becomes exhausted. At some point you're repeating the same things over and over again. At some point you're also probably going to have a realization. You're going to have a release of tension in the body. You might even experience a really deep sigh. And you can, excuse me, you can reread this journal, this free write journal, and compare it to your pattern notes. And you can see, just have more insight to what's going on and more insight to how you're feeling. And so this is the second thing. So recognizing patterns and free writing. The third thing I want you to do is I want you to connect with your ancestors. Now, this seems like obvious. Duh, of course, if I'm healing ancestral trauma, if I'm healing generational trauma, of course I should connect with my ancestors. But for me, I didn't grow up talking to dead relatives. I didn't really grow up even knowing my grandparents because a lot of them died before I was of age to remember much of them. And so what I did is I made an altar. I had a ceremony with myself. I lit a candle. I meditated. I pulled tarot cards and I asked for help. I asked my ancestors for help. I acknowledged that there were things I wanted to heal from my past and that there were things that I needed help on. And so this is something that you can do, and you don't have to do it exactly the way that I do it, but you could make a ceremony, you could make a ritual, you could borrow a ceremony or ritual from a religion or the internet. And the thing is, you might want to do this alone. You might want to do it with a friend. You might want to do it with a family member, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister. Because really, it's not important about how you do it. It's important that it resonates with you and helps you make this connection with your ancestors, and that it also helps you to recognize that you're not alone in this process at all. And the last thing is that because this isn't traditional healing, right? Psychology goes really deep into uncovering things that happened in your life. But these might be some things that didn't happen in your life. So you cannot get caught up in the details. Everything that you're healing isn't necessarily going to have an origin. So when you're healing ancestral patterns, you're not always going to have those really specific details or memories to recall. And the truth is, sometimes you do have memories and details to recall, but none of them make sense for your life, and that's okay. You just have to treat it as true. Because when you treat it as true, when you acknowledge it, it has a better chance of healing rather than you pushing it away. So don't get caught up on where it's coming from, if it's true, if it resonates with you, besides the fact that, of course, it's going to be resonating with how you're feeling right now. And focus instead on healing. Focus instead on building awareness. Focus instead on recognizing patterns. Recognizing how you want to act instead and showing up for yourself every single day. So I'll just repeat those again. It's recognizing the patterns, getting that journal, free writing, another journal exercise, connecting with your ancestors, and also just not getting caught up in those details. So I hope this was super helpful. I'm curious if you have any questions on this because I love doing this work. So if you do, DM me on Instagram, which my Instagram is in the show notes. And I would love to just hear anything from you on this and if you try this process. So sending you so much love, and I hope that you have just the best day ever. Tune in Tuesdays for more yummy and soulful episodes. If you love what you're hearing and want to support the podcast, please follow and rate the podcast on Spotify and Apple to help new listeners find us. To find out more about my coaching and healing practice, head over to my website, www.lesliecottle.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.